Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, we have been having some very important conversations going back and forth between domestic politics and international relations and the war in Ukraine. And I think the guest right now is going to bring us back to the most important issue facing this world right now, which is the war in Ukraine, with a very unique, powerful, and personal perspective. It's a man whose work I've admired and appreciated and celebrated for a long time, and I'm very excited about the next chapters of it. I think he's a voice of reason, an incredibly astute watcher, and an inspiration to veterans around America, and I think probably around the world. Very happy to have on the program the great and powerful Tim Mak is on Independent Americans. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you so much. That was a suspiciously meager and underrated introduction there.
Oh, well, your work is.
Could you have amped it up a little bit more?
I could. I absolutely could have, but I'm figuring we can get into that now, because for folks
I'm blushing over here.
For folks who are watching on video, this is very cool. I'm going to ask you, Tim, tell us what you're wearing. And I think you're the first guest in the history of Independent Americans to have laundry behind you, but with good reason. I said, if you're going to be able to make this, I don't care what you have in the background, but explain what you're wearing if you can.
Okay, the name of the game here in both my reporting and in this podcast is authenticity. Okay, so yes, I've got laundry drying. There are no, there are plenty of washing machines in Ukraine, no dryers, so it's all air dried. And yeah, that's my laundry back there. I mean, I'm living in a pretty small apartment with my Ukrainian partner and interpreter, Ross. And so, yeah, this is what we got. We've got that. We've got some solar panels over here to charge our batteries. We've got some helmets on the couch over there too.
And what are you wearing? Can you explain what you're wearing?
I'm wearing. I know that you're wearing a St. Javelin T-shirt, right? So in the theme of wearing something fun and on topic, I'm wearing a traditional Ukrainian attire called the Vyshyvanka, and it's very much. It's very much a local tradition to wear this during important holidays and events. And of course, nothing could be more of an important event than appearing on your podcast.
Well, I think the pending or developing spring offensive might be a more significant event than appearing on my show. But let me ask you, Tim, we've been in touch for many years, and I'm really grateful to have you on, especially now. I want to ground us in a question I ask everybody, which is especially important for you. Where are you and how are you?
I'm doing good. A little tired. I'm in Kyiv, Ukraine right now. The reason I'm a little tired is because of a number of things. One, I launched a new business. I left my job at NPR and started a new publication based out of Ukraine called The Counteroffensive. And you can find it at counteroffensive.news. That's one reason. Another reason is just more practically speaking, there was a huge missile barrage in Kyiv last night at around 3 o'clock in the morning. Woke everyone up. It was one of the biggest barrages in Kyiv since the invasion began over a year ago. So it was pretty disruptive. It kind of knocked me out. I'm already kind of jet lagged, right? I've only been here for about a week and change. Came from Washington D.C. and so it interrupted my sleep a little bit. But I'm on the mend and we'll press onward.
I have no doubt you will press onward. I want to get into the counteroffensive. I want to get into why you've made this transition from more traditional media to this independent venture. I really want to dig deep on your perspective, also as an Army veteran, U.S. Army veteran now in Ukraine. But let's start with the breaking news here. What was it like? You posted, this is why I love you being there. You posted audio of what it sounded like on your Twitter page, right? This is what it sounds like right now. And I knew there was a missile barrage happening, and I was like, okay, who do I know and trust that's there? And I was like, all right, Tim Mak is there, and he's going to have something. Sure enough, you were able to kind of put us in your shoes for a couple of minutes there. But can you describe it with more depth and with your powerful journalistic eye? What was that missile barrage like last night, and what's it like in Kyiv as things start to be culminating around something big?
It's hard for me to describe. I mean, do you know Jason Kander at all? Have you ever chatted with him about about the experience of being in a conflict area or something like that. One thing that he described in his most recent book was that there's this sort of low level stress that never quite leaves you when you're in a conflict area, whether you're deployed, if you're a U.S. Army veteran, you did rotations into Iraq or Afghanistan, or if you're here in Ukraine, there's always a little bit of danger all the time, and that doesn't really let up. So actually, it's in this weird way, it's kind of this perverted way. When these things actually do happen, it's like, oh well, even a minor sense of relief. It's like, okay, this is happening, I can deal with it. It's the not knowing, it's the uncertainty that can really cause a lot of strain and a lot of stress, I think. It's when things aren't happening but might happen. As you mentioned, I'm a former U.S. Army combat medic, and so the stress of bad things happening and having to do things in response, I feel like I can handle that. It's the every other moment of the tension and the waiting that can really be a strain, and I think that's really the best way I would describe what it's like to be in Kyiv right now. In a lot of ways, it's sunny, it's spring, flowers are blooming, people are out on the street having cups of coffee and things like that. It's a brilliant and very nice city. But because you could kind of feel the effects of the war dragging on and affecting people's minds, right? This stress that doesn't go away ever is inevitably going to have this real impact, this oppressive force on the way that people kind of think about their lives and the way they live their lives and how they feel, whether they're acknowledging it or not.
I'm so grateful for that description, because I think you nailed it. I haven't been to Kyiv during the war, but I think that constant feeling of stress, right, is something that folks who've been to conflict zones can relate to. And it doesn't matter if you're a truck driver or you're a Green Beret, it's that general atmosphere that you're living and operating in that's just cumulative, right? It just keeps kind of weighing on you. Let me ask you this, Tim, because I think you're going to be great at this. What's the most important story right now? And obviously you may not want to talk about something you're reporting on, but America is always consumed by itself. I think, some news agencies are going to follow what's happening in Ukraine, but a lot of them kind of lose it and then come and maybe they're going to wane until there's a massive offensive where there's lots of images and things to cover. But what do you think is the most important story happening right now in Ukraine?
Well, I think most people would tell you the counteroffensive, and literally my publication is called The Counteroffensive. Yeah. So it'd be wise for me to say that. But actually, I think that let me kind of twist the question just a little bit to what is the least covered but most important story, if I might, because I think the most important story is the counteroffensive, but I think that leads to maybe a boring answer. I want to give you an interesting one. And I think the least covered and most interesting story happening in Ukraine right now is this feeling that society is diverging between those who are fighting and those who are not fighting. There's increasing frustration. I'm sure a lot of your listeners who are veterans can relate to this issue, that there's a large segment of the population that is in the military right now fighting a war on an ongoing basis, and they're getting very afraid that those who are not have kind of forgotten them, have kind of pushed them aside. That this war, which has lasted for well over a year, is becoming kind of normal for a lot of civilians. It's particularly the further away from the front lines you get.
And you mean Tim, you mean Ukrainian civilians?
Correct. Yeah.
Ukrainian friction within Ukraine, not that they're pissed
yes.
that the French or the Americans aren't watching, but that their own countrymen aren't as connected.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're upset that Americans and folks from France and folks from the UK are starting to tune out in greater numbers too. But that is to be expected. I think that there's almost a sense of betrayal about whether civilians are still paying attention to this war, or whether in places further west in the country where it's much safer and where they have very rare attacks, whether those folks are just adapting and pretending like there's no war in existence at all. When the war first started, everyone, it was a total mobilization, a civilian and efforts. Every business in the country mobilized to help the war effort. Every person who wanted to sign up for the military showed up in long lines at various military facilities. Now, I mean, you can go and have a pretty nice cocktail in Lviv and walk in the park and pretend like there's nothing going on in the east of the country, where people are fighting and dying every single hour of the day and in the night. And I think that there's a sense that, you know, already that among military service members and veterans that they might be left behind. There was this phase before this full-scale invasion between 2014 and 2022, where there was an ongoing conflict going on in Ukraine, but it was mostly in the east of the country. And a lot of people felt then, a lot of soldiers felt then that they were kind of forgotten about. And, you know, I'll give you one anecdote. In Kyiv recently, I had lunch with a soldier yesterday, and he and a convoy of vehicles cut a very long gas line in Kyiv, right? Gas shortages during war, and there are really long lines at the gas station. But they're a military convoy, and they have an ability to skip the line, come in, get gas, and leave. And as they were leaving, some civilians started yelling at them, saying, "What gives you the right to cut in line?" That was the anecdote he gave me to say, look, civilians are just not, you know, they're just not understanding how serious it is for us. And there's some number of civilians who are just not taking as seriously this war as they were, of course, when Kyiv was surrounded and large, like at a previous phase of this war.
So, Tim, I want to talk about your transition. You're back in Kyiv after being there before. And you sit at such an interesting intersection, because I see the conventional American media crumbling, right? Cable news is kind of imploding. We're seeing massive layoffs and cuts. Vice went bankrupt this week. And it feels like a tectonic shift in the media environment. And at the same time, there's this great pool of talent. And I consider you, you know, among them. Folks may have remembered your work at NPR and other places. But now, you know, you've made a decision after leaving NPR to launch your own thing and to launch yourself into Ukraine. So can you talk about that? Why did you do it? And what do you hope to achieve? And why is that where you're putting literally your life on the line for?
Well, look, I mean, I think there's a number of reasons. Selfishly, I've always wanted to kind of build something myself and use, you know, if you're your own boss, you get to choose the kinds of stories you get to write. This comes with all sorts of risks, and it's a really it's a big bet, right? It's a bet that people still care about the war in Ukraine, that there's an audience for the sort of work that I'm doing, but it's a bet also on, you know, the kind of work that I've been doing, this kind of on the ground, immersive human feature and investigative reporting is not being well served by other media outlets, and that there is an audience out there that wants to read my kind of writing. Like, my kind of writing is going to do much less with what I think is boring a lot of Americans and other folks in the English-speaking world in the news coverage. I don't think that there's a ton of interest in, you know, where the front line is exactly today. This unit went there, or that unit went there, or the latest update from Bakhmut. I want to write stories that are human interest stories that put you on the ground and make you understand what it is like here in Ukraine. You mentioned, you know, my coverage last night on what it sounded like when those missiles came in, right? I mean, I'm talking about concussive force, the way I could feel it shaking the windows and just shake me, that car alarms are going off, that you could see these flashes in the sky as anti-aircraft works. You know, like, that's the sort of immersive experience that I want to create and provide. And I want to write stories that are interesting on a human level, right? Empathy is the basis of what I want to provide in this kind of coverage, that you can imagine yourself in these places because these characters are familiar to you. That you know, that this woman with the dog who's on the train fleeing Kyiv for the western regions of Ukraine, you'd be that kind of person as a dog owner, or one of your listeners would be that kind of person as a dog owner who would do exactly that, would leave all their earthly possessions behind, but take their dog with them. Or, you know, I mean, we did stories about this club in Odessa that's a jazz club, and it's owned by a guy who refuses to close the doors of the jazz club, even though he can't get any money for people to listen to jazz. He's basically turned the club into a place where on Saturdays they do free jazz concerts on the balcony for anyone in Odessa who wants to listen to it, even though there's no electricity in the city.
Mhm.
I mean, those are the kinds of stories I want to do. I mean, I will still do stories about the war, but I want you to come because there are compelling stories about humans, and then it's wrapped in the context of the war, if that makes any sense. That's kind of why I wanted to do this. And I think there's not a lot of great coverage in that way. And that's a void I hope to fill.
It makes total sense. And I think there's been an interesting thing that's happened since you've launched this, Tim, is I've watched your fans, and you are a person who has a lot of respect and a lot of admiration, and people really love your work. And I'm one of them. Like, you know, if you went to Uganda or you went to Alaska or you went to South Central, wherever you went, I would want to read what you're writing. Right. And the fact that you've chosen to go to Ukraine makes it like a double bottom line for me. And I think that you have a real opportunity to help shape the context of this war and the way other combat reporters have in the past couple of iterations. So I think it's also about your talent and about your unique perspective and about even your experience, you know, as a U.S. Army combat medic and through your eyes. But telling the stories that you are makes me remember that if you asked Americans, like, what are Ukrainians? It's kind of this monolith in the same way they thought about Iraqis or the way they thought about Afghans or the way they think about North Koreans. So for you to put a human face on it and tell those stories of human beings, I think is really what's missing here, because I feel like everyone knows Zelensky and that's kind of it, right? It's like Zelensky and maybe they know there's like an actor over there or a rapper, or they saw, you know, they all kind of look like the same, you know, white guys wearing camouflage who are in the mud. But you're unveiling this other side of them that I think is important. Is there a part of the culture, Tim, that you've seen in this work so far? I feel like there was a wave of like stories about grannies, right? Like the grannies who were like throwing tomato soup cans at the drones and things like that. But is there an underappreciated element of the Ukrainian society that you feel like isn't being shared?
I'm saving this, so don't steal this idea, okay?
Okay. Yeah.
When people ask me what's the most surprising thing that I've learned in Ukraine, they expect me to say something about weapons or about, you know, military tactics or something, and I say to them, well, you know, a lot of people think that the national food of Ukraine is borscht, the soup, but what it really is sushi and pizza. Okay.
Mhm.
And there's this hilarious geopolitical reason for this. Okay. That, you know, when they had the revolution about 18 years ago, a wave of foreign foods came into the country because of the interest in Ukrainians in integrating more deeply into the European Union. Now, sushi and pizza are not the signature foods of the European Union, but, you know, and for them, it was something that was new and exciting and interesting. And now almost anywhere you go in Ukraine, you can find sushi and pizza together in a restaurant. It's this wave of kind of Western influence that's come in here, despite the fact that, of course, sushi is from Asia. And but look, it's all lumped in together, and it tells the story of Ukraine's interest in being more tightly integrated with the West. And I think it's just such a funny little anecdote to tell because, well, you know, we're not anywhere near the ocean here. I don't know how they get the sushi.
I have to ask you, Tim.
You know, I have to look into this. I don't know where they get the sushi. There are no commercial flights into this country. It's got to come in by train or truck or something. I don't know, but I can walk, you know, 2 blocks in any direction to find a sushi place. I guarantee you.
I remember the early days of sushi hitting New York when I was coming up. It was like, you know, you weren't supposed to eat sushi on Monday because they didn't make deliveries on Sunday. So if you got sushi on Monday, it had been delivered on Saturday and they held it for 2 days. I don't know if you ever knew that or heard that, right? Whether
I didn't know. I think I came of age during a much more dignified sushi time.
Yes, you did. So I was going to ask you, is like, how is the sushi and pizza in Ukraine? How is it?
I have never gotten food poisoning from sushi in Ukraine, as far as I know.
That's a low bar though, but like outside of food poisoning, is it good? I mean, what's the pizza like that's preferred? Is it New York style pizza, Chicago pizza?
Yeah, it's New York style pizza. It's very, very good. I mean, the fact of the matter is that as Europeans, Ukrainians have a much higher standard for food and kind of, and the way it's presented than, I'm sorry to say, as an American, than do Americans. I mean, you can throw some online hate at me for saying this, but like the fine dining establishments in Ukraine are top notch, even during the war.
I
Even
believe
during the
that.
war.
That's what everyone says. I mean, I don't think you're eating Domino's over there. I mean,
Well, look, it's kind of really jarring, right? Because you can be on the front line in the morning, and in the evening you can be having a cocktail at a really hip, bar in Kyiv. It's just like the difference between, and this is where this is kind of in the theme of actually what I was saying before, right? Which is like this difference between those who are fighting and those who are not. Those who are not fighting, if they choose to ignore the news, if they choose not to, volunteer on the front lines, they have a very disjointed view of what's actually happening in their own country. You can be very, very comfortable here. I mean, absent, the occasional explosions and that sort of thing. And of course, everyone knows someone who's been killed or injured in the conflict. But if you squint a little bit and you kind of put your fingers in your ears, you can kind of almost imagine that there is no war happening. And a lot of people are opting for that. I think a lot of civilians are opting for that because it's so easy to do. And maybe as they're so exhausted by thinking about this war, as you may argue they have every right to be, that they're kind of coping by pretending it's not happening.
Tim, everybody's getting ready for this massive spring offensive, which may end up being the summer offensive, right? We know the commanders are going to decide when they're ready to go, and then they're going to go. And I think your counteroffensive product is going to be something for everybody to look to. But if you were recommending to your friends, your family back home, and you said, okay, like the big one's coming, here's how I recommend you keep track of it.
Obviously, you're gonna subscribe.
Obviously, the counteroffensive, but at a time where you're a guy who's been prolific. You're a guy who's been prolific on Twitter. Twitter is becoming a cesspool of like crap right now, right? And the places we would go to, and myself, I would often go to Twitter for first-person accounts for on-the-ground journalism. It seems like Substacks from people like you, and you in particular, are going to be a place to go. But if you were saying to Johnny or Jane American, hey, here's where you can count on for a good understanding of this counteroffensive that's to come, outside of you, what would you recommend?
Well, in general, I think I think the listeners of your podcast are going to be more kind of military technical minded. I think the Institute for the Study of War has done some amazing work on giving updates about where the battle lines are and what sort of signals to look for. Yeah. The Washington Post and New York Times bureaus in Ukraine are also quite strong. The Kyiv Independent is a great place to look for English language news in Ukraine. And, I'm going to put in another plug for my Substack, The Counteroffensive. You can find it at counteroffensive.news or counteroffensive.substack.com. We're going to be just absolutely after it, covering the counteroffensive just as soon as it happens. But we've been thinking about it not just about in the sense of this one campaign in the spring or summer. It's named after the counteroffensive, but it's also kind of a pushback. It's a counteroffensive against Western apathy and cynicism and ignorance about what's happening in Eastern Europe and the rise of authoritarianism in Eastern Europe and in Asia. So I'm glad that you would read me. I'm glad that you would read me, Paul, in those various places, because I hope to be going to a lot of those other places too, to tell stories of humans that are pushing back against autocracy and authoritarianism, right? That I think that empathy and human stories are toxic to autocracy, right? That they cannot coexist in the same world. At least the injustice of what's happening to individual people and humans who are affected by dictators. Those two cannot coexist in a just world. And if we're trying to push for a more just world, these human stories illuminate the injustice and push back against the foundations and the structures of dictatorship.
I know, Tim, you're going to stick around for a couple extra questions for our Patreon members. Then we're going to let you get back to the work. And so far, knock on wood, we've been uninterrupted. I would just remind folks that even setting this up when you're in Ukraine is difficult. So I'm grateful for you in doing that, the way we're communicating to make sure you got a good Wi-Fi set up and things are going to be good to go. So I thank you for hanging with us. Tim, I think you're one of the most important voices anywhere right now. And I think the fact that you've chosen to focus on Ukraine is significant, but I'm always going to be curious about your views on all things. And I think as this time develops where we're looking at autocracy rising around the globe, we're seeing political strife and division around the globe, especially in Western countries. I want to ask you a final question, which is, what does America look like from over there right now? You know, you were here a week ago, but I think your viewpoint is so powerful and your reflections are so astute. Now that you're sitting there in your traditional garb, you know, without a dryer, eating, you know, Ukrainian sushi and watching, you know, body bags come back, what does America look like to Tim from over there?
I think it looks very uncertain and unstable. I'm sure it feels uncertain and unstable from the United States as well. And let's be honest. I mean, America's gone through more difficult times and more unstable times and more uncertain and deadly times. But right now, from the perspective of Europe, you have a lot of allies wondering what is happening exactly to America. How deep is the radicalism that seems to be appearing in America on left and right? How deep do those roots go? And are there, you know, is there a stable, independent middle, much like many of the folks that you're talking to? Is that stable, independent middle the silent majority, or, you know, will the more radical voices win out? I mean, I know that a big concern in Europe is who wins the next presidential election or who controls the House and Senate. I know in Ukraine, it's a big issue of concern, even though some senior Ukrainian officials might not acknowledge it. I mean, they know that, for example, a Trump presidency would mean the end to a lot of the aid that has been necessary to keep Ukraine's war effort going. Or if not the end of the aid, then a serious downsizing of it. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and there are a lot of questions of, can we trust America as a partner in the long term? And so, I mean, I think your listeners, as you know, folks who are listening to a podcast about news and who are naturally curious about the world, I think, you know, it's the responsibility of you and me and everyone else to ensure that our representatives, when America makes promises, follows through on those promises.
Tim, you're an inspiration. You're a powerful and trusted voice. I am inspired by how often you've risen to the moment. And I think this new chapter for you has got a lot of people excited because we've seen your work and we're looking forward to what's to come. So I just want to thank you for your tenacity and your patriotism and setting an example for what, especially, you know, a veteran of our generation can be. You're really doing important, critical work. Everyone check out the counteroffensive. It'll be linked in the show notes here. And I hope you'll come back soon. And next time, maybe we can do a taste test of Ukrainian sushi and pizza and beer and whatever else you recommend. But I hope you'll come back to the show often.
Well, you know, I mean, if conditions allow, Paul, we could do it live here from Kyiv. We'll do a live episode from and taste test together in person.
I'm down. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right. We'll put a pin in it. We'll come back to it. Ladies and gentlemen, the great and powerful Tim Mak, thank you for joining us. We're going to follow your work. Stay safe over there and stay vigilant, my friend.
Thank you.